Hello there. Hello, Evelyn, Kelly, Don't Have a Tiff, and any others who are there now. I'm Gildart. This is Fireside Reading. And I was thinking before we started today how Christmas is kind of the perfect time for a fireside reading. How it's warm in with the fire and lovely just to sort of curl up with a book. That's what we do here together. I read classic old books in front of the fire. You can, if you like it, you can go to the YouTube channel Fireside Reading, where all the books that we've read together are up, except the book that we're reading, that's partly up, and the rest of it is coming. I've solved my computer issues. But to sit in front of the screen and enjoy a book together is sort of new way of experiencing an old thing which is being read to. That's what we're doing here. I love doing it, and I, however, am not going to do it for 10 days. So we leave to go to our youngest daughter's, she's in Italy at the moment studying. We're going to see her, and we are going to be leaving Thursday, but I'm not going to read on Wednesday either. So we're reading, tomorrow is the last day of reading. So today and tomorrow we'll read a passage to India. Then we will be in suspense for the last few days of reading, which will start again on the 1st of Jan. And sorry about the break, but I'm sure you all understand, and I hope you all have lovely Christmases as well. I'm sure we will. All right, let's push on, shall we? Welcome to a fireside reading of A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, Chapter 29. The visit of the Lieutenant Governor of the province formed the next stage in the decomposition of the Malabar. Sir Gilbert, though not an enlightened man, held enlightened opinions. Exempted by a long career in the Secretariat from personal contact with the peoples of India, he was able to speak of them urbanely and to deplore racial prejudice. He applauded the outcome of the trial and congratulated Fielding on having taken the broad, the sensible, the only possible charitable view from the first. Speaking confidentially, he proceeded. Fielding deprecated confidences, but Sir Gilbert insisted on imparting them. The affair had been mishandled by certain of our friends up the hill, who did not realize that the hands of the clock move forward, not back, etc., etc. One thing he could guarantee, the principal would receive a most cordial invitation to rejoin the club, and he begged, nay, commanded him to accept. He returned to his Himalayan altitudes well satisfied. The amount of money Miss Quested would have to pay, the precise nature of what had happened in the caves, these were local details and did not concern him. Fielding found himself drawn more and more into Miss Quested's affairs. The college remained closed, and he ate and slept at Hamidullah's, so there was no reason she should not stop on if she wished. In her place, he would have cleared out sooner than submit to Ronnie's half-hearted and distracted civilities, but she was waiting for the hourglass of her sojourn to run through. A house to live in, a garden to walk in during the brief moment of the cool, that was all she asked, and he was able to provide them. Disaster had shown her limitations, and he realized now what a fine, loyal character she was. Her humility was touching. She never repined at being the worst of both worlds. She never repined at getting the worst of both worlds. She regarded it as the due punishment of her stupidity. When he hinted to her that a personal apology to Aziz might be seemly, she said sadly, "Of course. I ought to have thought of it myself. My instincts never helped me. Why didn't I rush up to him after the trial? Yes, of course I will write him an apology. But please, will you dictate it?" Between them they concocted a letter, sincere and full of moving phrases. But it was not moving as a letter. "Shall I write another?" she inquired. "Nothing matters if I can undo the harm I've caused. I can do this right and that right, but when the two are put together, they come wrong. That's the defect of my character. I have never realized it until now. I thought that if I was just and asked questions, I would come through every difficulty." He replied, "Our letter is a failure for a simple reason, which we had better face. You have no real affection for Aziz, or Indians generally." She assented. "The first time I saw you, you were wanting to see India, not Indians. And it occurred to me, that won't take us far. Indians know whether they are liked or not. They cannot be fooled here. Justice never satisfies them, and that is why the British Empire rests on sand." Then she said, "Do I like anyone, though?" Presumably she liked Heslop, and he changed the subject, for this side of her life did not concern him. His Indian friends were, on the other hand, a bit above themselves. Victory, which would have made the English sanctimonious, made them aggressive. They wanted to develop an offensive, and tried to do so by discovering new grievances and wrongs, many of which had no existence. They suffered from the usual disillusion that attends warfare. The aims of battle and the fruits of conquest are never the same. The latter have their value, and only the saint rejects them, but their hint of immortality vanishes as soon as they are held in the hand. Although Sir Gilbert had been courteous, almost obsequious, the fabric he represented had in no wise bowed its head. British officialism remained as all-pervading and as unpleasant as the sun, and what was next to be done against it was not very obvious even to Mahmud Ali. Loud talk and trivial lawlessness were attempted, and behind them continued a genuine but vague desire for education. "Mr. Fielding, we must all be educated properly." Aziz was friendly and domineering. He wanted Fielding to give in to the East, as he called it, and live in a condition of affectionate dependence upon it. "You can trust me, Cyril." No question of that. And Fielding had no roots among his own people. Yet he really couldn't become a sort of Mohammed Latif. When they argued about it, something racial intruded, not bitterly, but inevitably, like the color of their skins, coffee color versus pinko-gray. And Aziz would conclude, "Can't you see that I'm grateful to you for your help and want to reward you?" And the other would retort, "If you want to reward me, let Miss Quested off paying." The insensitiveness about Adela displeased him. It would, from every point of view, be right to treat her generously, and one day he had the notion of appealing to the memory of Mrs. Moore. Aziz had this high and fantastic estimate of Mrs. Moore. Her death had been a real grief to his warm heart. He wept like a child, and ordered his 3 children to weep also. There was no doubt that he respected and loved her. Fielding's first attempt was a failure. The reply was, "I see your trick. I want revenge on them. Why should I be insulted and suffer, and the contents of my pockets read, and my wife's photograph taken to the police station? Also, I want the money to educate my little boys, as I explained to her." But he began to weaken, and Fielding was not ashamed to practice a little necromancy. Whenever the question of compensation came up, he introduced the dead woman's name. Just as other propagandists invented her a tomb, so did he raise a questionable image of her in the heart of Aziz, saying nothing that he believed to be untrue, but producing something that was probably far from the truth. Aziz yielded suddenly. He felt it was Mrs. Moore's wish that he should spare the woman who was about to marry her son, that it was the only honor he could pay her, and he renounced with a passionate and beautiful outburst the whole of the compensation money, claiming only costs. It was fine of him, and, as he foresaw, it won him no credit with the English. They still believed he was guilty. They believed it to the end of their careers, and retired Anglo-Indians in Tunbridge Wells or Cheltenham still murmur to each other, "That Marabar case which broke down because the poor girl couldn't face giving her evidence, that was another bad case." When the affair was thus officially ended, Ronnie, who was about to be transferred to another part of the province, approached Fielding with his usual constraint and said, "I wish to thank you for the help you have given Miss Quested. She will not, of course, trespass on your hospitality further. She has, as a matter of fact, decided to return to England. I have just arranged about her passage for her. I understand she would like to see you." "I shall go round at once." On reaching the college, he found her in some upset. He learnt that the engagement had been broken by Ronnie. "Far wiser of him," she said pathetically. "I ought to have spoken myself, but I drifted on, wondering what would happen. I would willingly have gone on spoiling his life through inertia. One has nothing to do, one belongs nowhere, and becomes a public nuisance without realizing it." In order to reassure him, she added, "I speak only of India. I am not astray in England. I fit in there. No, don't think I shall do harm in England. When I am forced back there, I shall settle down to some career. I have sufficient money left to start myself, and heaps of friends of my own type. I shall be quite all right." Then, sighing, "But oh, the trouble I've brought on everyone here. I can never get over it. My carefulness as to whether we should marry or not. And in the end, Ronnie and I part, and aren't even sorry. We ought never to have thought of marriage. Weren't you amazed when our engagement was originally announced?" "Not much. At my age, one's seldom amazed," he said, smiling. "Marriage is too absurd in any case. It begins and continues for such very slight reasons. The social business props it up on one side and the theological business on the other. But neither of them are marriage, are they? I've friends who can't remember why they married. No more can their wives. I suspect that it mostly happens haphazardly, though afterwards various noble reasons are invented. About marriage, I am cynical." "I am not. This false start has been all my own fault. I was bringing to Ronnie nothing that ought to be brought. That was why he rejected me, really. I entered that cave thinking, am I fond of him? I have not yet told you that, Mr. Fielding. I didn't feel justified. Tenderness, respect, personal intercourse. I tried to make them take the place of—" "I no longer want love," he said, supplying the word. "No more do I. My experiences here have cured me. But
I want others to want it.
But to go back to our first talk, for I suppose this is our last one, when you entered that cave, who did follow you? Or did no one follow you? Can you now say? I don't like it left in air.
Let us call it the guide, she said, indifferently. It will never be known. It's as if I ran my finger along that polished wall in the dark and cannot get further. I am up against something, and so are you. Mrs. Moore, she did know.
How could she have known what we don't?
Telepathy, perhaps.
The pert, meagre word fell to the ground. Telepathy. What an explanation. Better withdraw it, and Adela did so. She was at the end of her spiritual tether, and so was he. Were there worlds beyond which they could never touch, or did all that is possible enter their consciousness? They could not tell. They only realized that their outlook was more or less similar and found in this a satisfaction. Perhaps life is a mystery, not a muddle. They could not tell. Perhaps the 100 Indias which fuss and squabble so tiresomely are one, and the universe they mirror is one. They had not the apparatus for judging. Write to me when you get to England.
I shall, often. You have been excessively kind. Now that I'm going, I realize it. I wish I could do something for you in return, but I see you've all you want.
I think so, he replied after a pause. I have never felt more happy and secure out here. I really do get on with Indians, and they do trust me. It's pleasant that I haven't had to resign my job. It's pleasant to be praised by an LG. Until the next earthquake, I remain as I am.
Of course, this death has been troubling me.
Aziz was so fond of her too.
But it has made me remember that we must all die. All these personal relations we try to live by are temporary. I used to feel death selected people. It is a notion one gets from novels, because some of the characters are usually left talking at the end. Now, death spares no one begins to be real.
Don't let it become too real, or you'll die yourself. That is the objection to meditating upon death. We are subdued to what we work in. I have felt the same temptation and had to sheer off. I want to go on living a bit.
So do I.
A friendliness, as of dwarfs shaking hands, was in the air. Both man and woman were at the height of their powers, sensible, honest, even subtle. They spoke the same language and held the same opinions, and the variety of age and sex did not divide them. Yet they were dissatisfied. When they agreed, I want to go on living a bit, or I don't believe in God, the words were followed by a curious backwash, as though the universe had displaced itself to fill up a tiny void, or as though they had seen their own gestures from an immense height. Dwarfs talking, shaking hands, and assuring each other that they stood on the same footing of insight. They did not think they were wrong, because as soon as honest people think they are wrong, instability sets up. Not for them was an infinite goal behind the stars, and they never sought it. But wistfulness descended on them now, as on other occasions. The shadow of a dream fell over their clear-cut interests, and objects never seen again seemed messages from another world. "And I do like you so very much, if I may say so," he affirmed.
"I am glad, for I like you. Let's meet again."
"We will, in England, if I ever take home leave."
"But I suppose you're not likely to do that yet."
"Quite a chance. I have a scheme on now, as a matter of fact."
"Oh, that would be very nice."
So it petered out. 10 days later, Adela went off by the same route as her dead friend. The final beat up before the monsoon had come. The country was stricken and blurred. Its houses, trees, and fields were all modelled out of the same brown paste, and the sea at Bombay slid about like broth against the quays. Her last Indian adventure was with Anthony, who followed her onto the boat and tried to blackmail her. She had been Mr. Fielding's mistress, Anthony said. Perhaps Anthony was discontented with his tip. She rang the cabin bell and had him turned out, but his statement created rather a scandal, and people did not speak to her much during the first part of the voyage. Through the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea she was left to herself and to the dregs of Chandrapur. With Egypt, the atmosphere altered. The clean sands heaped on each side of the canal seemed to wipe off everything that was difficult and equivocal, and even Port Said looked pure and charming in the light of a rose-grey morning. She went on shore there with an American missionary. They walked out to the Lesseps statue. They drank the tonic air of the Levant. "To what duties, Miss Quested, are you returning in your own country after your taste of the tropics?" the missionary asked. "Observe, I don't say to what do you turn, but to what do you return. Every life ought to contain both a turn and a return. This celebrated pioneer," he pointed to the statue, "will make my question clear. He turns to the east. He returns to the west. You can see it from the cute position of his hands, one of which holds a string of sausages." The missionary looked at her humorously in order to cover the emptiness of his mind. He had no idea what he meant by turn and return, but he often used words in pairs for the sake of moral brightness. "I see," she replied. Suddenly, in the Mediterranean clarity, she had seen. Her first duty on returning to England was to look up those other children of Mrs. Moore's, Ralph and Stella. Then she would turn to her profession. Mrs. Moore had tended to keep the products of her 2 marriages apart, and Adela had not come across the younger branch so far. Thanks for joining me. It's a fascinating book. I hope you're enjoying it. One more day of reading tomorrow, and then nothing for 10 days or so until the first day of the new year. Until I see you all tomorrow, everyone, I hope you stay very, very well.